Are you guys ready to listen to a motivational speaker?
Yeah!
We have none other than Mr. Bobby Hesley. This guy, I met him on the internet. He was in the Orient. Yet, and that was not too long ago, to be honest with you, and I almost fell in love with his thoughts, ideas, and expressions and deliverance of what he stands for. He talks about faith. He talks about the United States. He talks about slavery. He talks about Donald Trump. He talks about Joe Biden. But I don't want to spoil it. Let's hear from Bobby Hesley.
My brothers from other mothers. My sisters from other misters. It is so great to be in a room full of people, full of fellow minorities, fellow Americans, people of different faiths. Even though we may not all share the same religious form of expression, some of us may not even share faith in Jesus Christ, but you know what? We share love for the United States of America.
That's right.
And we also share love for our 45th President of the United States, President soon to be President re-elect Donald J. Trump. And according to his opponent, I ain't black for what I just said. But long story short, guys, I grew up in Brightmoor, Detroit. I'm proud of where I grew up from. And the fact is, Brightmoor, Detroit was the center of the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s. It really was. And the reason why I am voting for Donald Trump and trying to get as many of my fellow African Americans as I can to join me in voting for Donald Trump is because to vote for Joe Biden is to vote for systemic racism. Now, I don't want to run the risk of making baseless accusations and just flaunting rhetoric, because that sounds pretty good on a rhetoric level. Let's set aside the rhetoric and let's look at the actual record. The reason I'm not voting for Joe Biden is, number one, I've lost count. I've lost track of all the blatantly racist things that this man has said, right? That years ago, even when Barack Obama was president, he said he's the first clean and articulate mainstream black man to run for office. It's like out of a storybook, man. He actually said that. And then he said that poor kids are just as talented as white kids. He said that we ain't black if we don't support him.
Absolutely.
At a 2012 fundraiser, he said that if Mitt Romney becomes president, in a black church he said this, he said they're gonna put y'all's back in chains. Back in the chains that your party put us in, sir. Because the Democrat Party is the party of slavery. The Democrat Party is the party of Jim Crow segregation. The Democrat Party is the party not only of abortion, but specifically the party of black population control. We have been here for 400 years, since 1619, and we're still stuck at 13% of the population. Because 20 million of our black babies, more than a third of black babies, have been aborted.
That's right, it's gotta stop.
It's gotta stop, my brother.
Yep.
And you know what? There's a certain phrase that we don't think of. It's called the birth opportunity cost. So not only did we lose 20 million black Americans, but when you factor in the birth opportunity cost, we've actually lost closer to 60 million black Americans. You want to hear some math? The generation of Roe, the very first generation back in 1973 that were aborted, you know how old they'd be right now? They would be 47 years old by now. They would have 2 or 3 kids themselves. They would have grandkids by now. So imagine if each of these 20 million babies that had been aborted, let's just be conservative and say that they just had 1 child. That automatically doubles it to 40 million black Americans that have been killed with abortion, that have been championed to be killed with abortion. The reason I'm voting against Joe Biden and voting for President Donald Trump is because his 94 crime bill targeted black drug addicts. Did you know that there's a provision in Biden's 94 crime bill that gave harsher penalties for crack than it does for cocaine? Now remember when I said that I'm from Brightmoor, from the epidemic, from the center of the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s? I know what I'm talking about on this, because what drug dealers would often do is they would buy cocaine in its purest form, which was very expensive. They would buy it wholesale, and they would water it down with water and baking soda, and then they would cut it up, and they could mass multiply their cocaine. If they got a kilo of cocaine, they could turn it into many pounds, many dozens of pounds of crack if they diluted it with enough water and baking soda. Because they didn't care about the quality of their product, they cared about the quantity of it, because they knew that their poor black clients could only afford small doses of crack. So the more they could mass produce, the more they can mass sell. It was all about profits. The 94 crime bill actually targeted, it gave harsher penalties for crack than cocaine. So for example, if you're Hunter Biden and you want to get kicked out of the Navy for doing cocaine, which is what happened to him, you won't get as harsh of a penalty as if it were crack. So all of these drug addicts were put in jail for many decades, and you can go find footage on YouTube right now on C-SPAN of then Senator Joe Biden back in the year 1992 when he was pushing hard for this crime bill to go forward. He said that we pretty much put everything in this bill except hanging you for jaywalking. Kamala Harris was his attack dog, one of the enforcers on that with the 3 strikes rule in California. But I find it interesting, folks, that a lot of times, you know, in Matthew 12:34, it says that it's from the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks, right? If you want to know what's in somebody's heart, listen to what comes out of their mouth. I find it interesting how easy that phrase, hanging you, came out of Joe Biden's mouth. He's speaking like a true Democrat when he says that, because he is the party of the KKK. So much to the point where he eulogized Senator Robert Byrd at his funeral, who was a former great KKK Grand Master. So we have to give Donald Trump another 4 years. Everything that Donald Trump has done for my community has been nothing short of Lincoln-esque progress that he's made. Ever since the great Abraham Lincoln, the very first Republican president, the 16th president, but the very first Republican president, and it was Abraham Lincoln who started the original Black Lives Matter movement.
That's right.
When he said that we are willing to go to war to put an end to slavery, to free black people from slavery. And he ended up being a martyr for my people. He was sitting in a theater and he caught a bullet to the back of the head because he freed black people. And then 100 years later, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, if you fast forward, we have Lyndon B. Johnson that signs the Great Society, the War on Poverty, which is another form of terrible slavery that put blacks under. Well, 50 years after that, 50 years after 1965, there was a blue-collar real estate billionaire up in New York who owned a tower named Trump Tower, who came down his escalator and announced his bid to run for President of the United States. He ended up winning, and he ended up putting things in place for my community that is going to set us forward for generations to come, starting with the historically black college university grants, permanent automatic grants that renew every year. All of his predecessors would make these historically black colleges get down on their knees and beg for funding every year from the federal government, including our first black president, Barack Obama. He actually cut funding to HBCUs. Trump came along and he said, you know what, you don't have to beg anymore. You're going to get $250 million a year. It's going to renew automatically. Then he signed his Prison Reform Act, which is the First Step Act. I've coined it, I like to call it the Biden Reform Act, because really what it was a dismantling of that horribly systemically racist 94 crime bill, where he has freed thousands of people from overly harsh prison sentences and given them a second chance, like the Congresswoman Angela Stanton King down in Atlanta, who's running for a Senate seat or a congressional seat. Then he's plummeted the black unemployment rate to the lowest it's ever been since 1973, since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started reporting that number. And I would challenge you guys to go on YouTube and watch his presidential State of the Union speech when he actually announced that statistic and the camera actually panned to the Congressional Black Caucus and the angry look on their face that they had. To hear a Republican president, who they go out of their way to make into this racist, report the progress in our community that they actually don't want us to have. Because like Frederick Douglass said, there are certain types of Negroes who stand to lose their jobs if black people make progress. And those were the kind of people that were that. So in closing, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I stand with all of you, my fellow minorities, because I know you all stand with me. We're all in this thing together. God bless America. We all love this country. We love our president. And I love all of you. Thank you.